I'm Stephen, 34, a third-generation farmer who inherited 15 acres of prime agricultural land from my grandfather 7 years ago. What started as a rundown plot has become my thriving, organic farm and life's passion. My family seemed supportive until that Sunday brunch, when everything changed. My parents ambushed me with demands to sign over my legally inherited land to my sister Rebecca. When I refused, I never imagined my own father would destroy everything I built, screaming that my land belonged to my sister now. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear how my evidence in court left my family absolutely speechless. My connection to this land runs deeper than mere ownership. Every summer from age 7, I would spend weeks with Grandpa Frank on this farm. He taught me to respect the soil, understand the seasons, and appreciate the miracle of growing food. Those childhood lessons planted seeds that would grow into my life's purpose, though I didn't realize it then. When Grandpa was diagnosed with terminal cancer, our bond grew even stronger. I was in college studying business, because that's what my parents wanted, but I spent every weekend and break by his side. During those final months, we'd sit on his porch overlooking the fields, and he'd share farming wisdom accumulated over decades. Between treatments, we'd walk the property line together, his frail hand pointing out boundary markers and telling stories about each section of the land. "This land has heart, Stephen," he'd tell me. "It needs someone who understands that." While my parents and sister visited occasionally, they viewed the farm as an inconvenience. My sister Rebecca, 4 years older and climbing the corporate ladder in marketing, would complain about the dirt and lack of cell reception. My father Richard, an accountant with no farming background, saw the property only in terms of tax burdens and potential resale value. Grandpa sensed this disconnect. One evening, about 2 months before he passed, he told me he was leaving the 15 acres to me, in his will. The others wouldn't cherish it, he said simply. "You will." After his death, the will reading confirmed his wishes. The farmhouse and 15 surrounding acres were legally mine. The rest of his modest estate was divided equally between Rebecca and me. My parents seemed fine with this arrangement initially. Rebecca showed relief at not having to deal with that old place, as she called it. With my inheritance came a decision point. I abandoned my half-finished business degree and enrolled in sustainable agriculture programs. My parents thought I was throwing away my potential. "Farming is a dying industry," my father would lecture. "You're choosing poverty." My mother Diane would add, "Your grandfather meant well, but he's trapped you in the past." Despite their doubts, I was determined. I took out a small loan, renovated the farmhouse, and began the hard work of transforming neglected fields into productive land. The first 2 years were brutal. 16-hour days, countless setbacks, and a steep learning curve. But gradually, the farm began to flourish. By year 3, my organic operation was gaining recognition. I specialized in heirloom vegetables, established a small apple and pear orchard, built a greenhouse for year-round production, and designed an efficient irrigation system. Local restaurants sought my produce, and my weekend farmers market stand developed a loyal following. All this time, family dynamics were shifting subtly. My parents retired earlier than planned, after some investments soured. Their lifestyle expectations remained unchanged despite their reduced income. Rebecca married Matthew, a real estate developer with political ambitions and connections. They lived extravagantly in the city, and Rebecca rose to marketing director at a prestigious firm. As my parents' financial situation tightened, Rebecca and Matthew began providing support. weekend trips, a new car, renovations to their home, all gifts that came with increasing influence. Meanwhile, I was too busy building my farm to notice how Matthew and Rebecca were positioning themselves as the family decision-makers. I maintained contact, attending holiday gatherings and occasional dinners. Conversations were strained but civil. My parents gradually shifted from dismissing my farming as a phase to reluctant acknowledgement that I was making a living. Rebecca remained distant but polite, asking perfunctory questions about the gardening hobby. I knew she didn't understand my choices, but I thought we had mutual respect. The first real warning sign appeared 3 years ago when suburban development began creeping closer to my area. Neighboring farms sold to developers for surprising sums. Land values tripled in 18 months. I started receiving letters from development companies, including Matthew's, offering to buy my property. I declined them all. Then Rebecca's attitude changed. She suddenly developed interest in our family heritage and began visiting the farm occasionally. She'd ask probing questions about my long-term plans, crop yields, and revenue. I naively interpreted this as growing appreciation for my work. My parents started making odd comments too. "You're sitting on a gold mine," my father would say. "All this work for produce when you could sell and be set for life." My mother would add, "It seems selfish to keep all this land just for vegetables when it could provide housing for dozens of families." I dismissed their remarks, focusing instead on expanding my business. I added a small apiary for honey production and began hosting educational tours for school groups. The farm wasn't just financially sustainable now, it was thriving and serving the community. I felt Grandpa would be proud. Looking back, I should have recognized the pattern forming. The increasing questions about my property boundaries. The comments about how Rebecca missed out on her share of inheritance. Matthew's casual mentions of zoning changes in adjacent areas. These weren't coincidences. They were reconnaissance for what was coming. Last spring, when Matthew's development company purchased the property bordering mine to the east, alarm bells finally rang in my head. At family dinners, he'd discuss synergy and comprehensive development plans while eyeing my land. I began documenting these conversations, sensing trouble ahead but hoping I was being paranoid. I wasn't. The Sunday that changed everything started normally enough. My mother called on Wednesday to invite me to brunch, emphasizing it was important family time, and I absolutely had to be there. Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I agreed. I arrived at my parents' suburban home at 11 that Sunday morning. Their house was a testament to appearances, tastefully decorated but leveraged to the hilt with debt I would later discover. The formal dining room was rarely used except for special occasions, which heightened my suspicion about this gathering. My mother had prepared an elaborate spread: quiche, smoked salmon, fresh fruit, and her signature blueberry scones. My father was unusually attentive, refilling my coffee without being asked. The forced cheerfulness felt like the calm before a storm. Rebecca and Matthew arrived 30 minutes late in his new luxury SUV. She was impeccably dressed, as always, and he carried an expensive bottle of champagne. For celebrating, he announced with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Celebrating what?" I asked. "Family," my father interjected quickly. "Just being together." Throughout the meal, conversation remained superficial. Weather, sports, distant relatives. Rebecca asked perfunctory questions about the farm while checking her phone. Matthew dominated with stories about his latest development project and the politicians he'd impressed. After dessert, my father cleared his throat. "Now that we've enjoyed this wonderful meal, we need to discuss something important." He nodded to Matthew, who produced a leather portfolio from beside his chair. Stephen, my father continued, we've been thinking about the family's future, about creating security for all of us. Matthew opened the portfolio and spread out professional architectural renderings across the dining table. I froze as I recognized the topography. These were plans for my land, my farm, transformed into a luxury housing development called Heritage Estates. 64 premium homes, Matthew announced proudly. Private roads, a clubhouse, artificial lake. We're talking multi-million-dollar properties. My mother touched my arm. Isn't it beautiful, Stephen? And the best part is, it helps everyone in the family. I don't understand, I said, though the sick feeling in my stomach told me I understood perfectly. My father took over. It's simple. You sign the land over to Rebecca, as it should have been shared with her from the beginning. Matthew's company develops it. Mom and I get 20% of the profits to secure our retirement. You get 15%, which is more than you'd make in 10 years of farming. Everybody wins. Rebecca's smile was triumphant. It's time to be practical, little brother. That land is worth millions now. Not just for vegetables. I sat in stunned silence before asking, and if I say no? This is legally my land. Grandpa left it specifically to me. The temperature in the room seemed to drop instantly. My father's face hardened. Then you're choosing land over family. We've supported your farming experiment for years, but now the family needs this. Your mother and I are facing financial difficulties. This development is our security. You'd be betraying all of us, my mother added, tears forming on cue. After everything we've done for you. Matthew leaned forward. Let's be reasonable, Stephen. This is happening one way or another. The smart move is to cooperate. We're already securing permits and approvals. My investors are ready to break ground next quarter. You've been planning this without even talking to me? I stood up, knocking my chair backward. This is my land, my livelihood, my life. Rebecca's voice turned cold. It was supposed to be shared, Stephen. Grandpa wasn't thinking clearly at the end. This fixes his mistake. There was no mistake, I insisted. And there's nothing to discuss. The answer is no. My father slammed his hand on the table. You ungrateful child. After all we've sacrificed. You have 1 week to reconsider, or you're no longer part of this family. 1 week, Matthew echoed. After that, we do this the hard way. I looked at each of their faces, my father's rage, my mother's manipulative tears, Matthew's calculating confidence, Rebecca's entitled resentment. These people were strangers wearing my family's faces. There's nothing to reconsider, I said, walking toward the door. Grandpa knew exactly what he was doing. That land will remain a farm as long as I'm alive. You'll regret not being reasonable about this. Rebecca called after me. Family should come first. Stephen. I turned back one last time. This isn't about family. It's about greed. And I want no part of it. As I drove away, I had no idea just how far they would go to get what they wanted. The week following the brunch became a nightmare of constant harassment. My phone buzzed endlessly with texts and calls from my parents and Rebecca. Voicemails ranged from my mother's tearful pleas, "We'll lose everything if you don't help us," to my father's thinly veiled threats. "You'll be sorry you chose dirt over blood." I blocked their numbers after 3 days, which only escalated the situation. They began showing up at the farm unannounced. My mother would knock on the door crying, while my father demanded I be a man and face them. Once, Rebecca and Matthew arrived in separate vehicles, attempting to corner me while I was working in the fields. "We can do this amicably or not, but it's happening," Matthew informed me during one unwelcome visit. "I've got investors and contractual obligations. The bulldozers are ready either way." When direct confrontation failed, they recruited extended family members. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke with suddenly called with concerns about my well-being and advice about making peace with my parents. It became clear they'd been fed a distorted version of events, casting me as mentally unstable and irrationally attached to worthless farmland that could save the family from financial ruin. My mother spread rumors that I was suffering from depression and not thinking clearly. My father told relatives I was being manipulated by environmental extremist friends who wanted to block progress. Rebecca suggested to former high school classmates that I had developed unhealthy obsessions and was living as a recluse. Their campaign extended beyond family. Somehow, local business owners began treating me differently. Regular customers at the farmers market asked probing questions about development plans. I overheard whispers about how I was blocking economic opportunity for the community. The pressure was strategic and relentless. Matthew, I later discovered, had already promoted the development to local officials, promising tax revenue and job creation. He'd even started pre-selling homes on a coming-soon basis, putting himself in a financial bind if the project didn't proceed. Not everyone turned against me. My most loyal customers stood firm, increasing their orders and offering words of support. Fellow farmers understood the value of preserving agricultural land and rallied around me. My neighbor Jackson, whose family had farmed adjacent land for generations, became my strongest ally. "They're using classic tactics," Jackson told me. "Over coffee in my kitchen. Isolate, pressure, discredit." Developers pulled the same stunts with my grandfather. "Don't let them wear you down." But the constant siege took its toll. I lost sleep, lost weight, and found myself jumping at unexpected sounds. The farm that had always been my sanctuary became a place of stress and vigilance. I started therapy sessions with a counselor who specialized in family estrangement, which helped me process the betrayal but couldn't stop the external pressure. After a particularly aggressive confrontation where my father threatened to take matters into his own hands, I consulted my friend Alicia, an attorney specializing in property disputes. On her advice, I took several protective measures. First, I sent legally binding no trespassing notices to my parents, Rebecca and Matthew. Second, I installed a comprehensive surveillance system covering the property boundaries, main fields, and approaches to the farmhouse. Third, I documented every communication, threat, and unwanted visit in a detailed log with dates, times, and exact quotes. Finally, I visited the local sheriff's office to file a report about the escalating harassment and threats. "I don't want to involve law enforcement against my own family," I explained to the deputy. "But I'm concerned about where this is heading." The deputy, who regularly bought tomatoes from my stand, nodded sympathetically. "Property disputes turn ugly fast, especially with family. We'll increase patrols past your place, but call immediately if anything happens." Something in his tone suggested he didn't fully grasp the severity of the situation. To him, this was probably just another family squabble over inheritance, unpleasant, but ultimately resolvable. I walked out wondering if anyone truly understood the mounting dread I felt. That night, I called my oldest friend, Michael, who lived across the country. "Am I being unreasonable?" I asked after explaining the situation. "Should I just sell and avoid all this conflict?" "Would your grandfather want you to give up?" he asked. "No, He believed in this land, in what it could produce. Then there's your answer, Michael said. But Stephen, be careful. People who feel entitled to what you have can be dangerous. They've already shown they don't respect boundaries. His warning proved prophetic sooner than either of us imagined. 2 days later, I received an anonymous tip from someone at the county permit office. Matthew's company had already filed for rezoning of my property from agricultural to residential. The application contained a forged signature purporting to be mine, granting development rights. This was no longer just pressure, it was fraud. I immediately reported this to my attorney and the sheriff's office, providing documentation, proving the signature wasn't mine. The investigation moved slowly, with officials reluctant to pursue criminal charges in what they still viewed as a civil family matter. Meanwhile, Matthew accelerated his marketing campaign for Heritage Estates, with glossy brochures showing my farm transformed into luxury homes. Rebecca began telling mutual acquaintances they should wait until spring to see the positive changes coming to the old family property. The pressure and anxiety became nearly unbearable. I installed additional security measures and began sleeping with my phone and a baseball bat beside my bed. Jackson and other neighboring farmers took turns driving by my property during the night, creating an informal security patrol. Despite everything, I continued working my land. Spring planting couldn't wait for family drama to resolve. I had contracts with restaurants to fulfill, community-supported agriculture members counting on produce, and the farm stand to stock. The physical labor provided some relief from the psychological warfare, and watching new growth emerge from the soil reminded me what I was fighting for. I had no idea that my worst nightmares would soon materialize in broad daylight. Saturday mornings were always my busiest time at the farmer's market. With spring crops flourishing, I had my truck loaded before dawn with fresh lettuce, spinach, radishes, and early herbs. The greenhouse tomatoes and cucumbers were particularly sought after, commanding premium prices as the first local offerings of the season. That particular Saturday seemed normal as I finished my morning chores, fed the chickens, and checked the irrigation system before departure. I remember feeling a moment of peace, watching the sun rise over my fields, thinking perhaps the worst of the family crisis had passed. It had been 3 days since any contact from them, the longest stretch of quiet in weeks. I left for the market at 6:30, the loaded truck bumping down the long driveway to the main road. Looking back, I realize now this routine was known to my family. They knew exactly when I would be gone, and for how long. By 7:15, I had my stand set up and was arranging produce when the first customers arrived. Regular patrons chatted about recipes and gardening tips. New visitors asked questions about growing methods. For a few hours, I was just a farmer among farmers, not a man under siege. At 10:42, my phone rang. Jackson never called during market hours, unless it was an emergency. "Stephen, get back here now," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Your dad's here with a bulldozer. He's tearing up your fields." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What? Call the police?" "Already did. But you need to get here." "It's bad, Stephen. Really bad." I abandoned my stand, asking a neighboring vendor to watch my things. The drive back to the farm was a 17-minute blur of panic and disbelief. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I tried to process what Jackson had told me. A bulldozer? My own father? As I turned onto my road, I could see dust clouds rising from my property. The security camera alerts I'd missed during the busy market had stacked up on my phone, 27 notifications in the past hour. I slammed on the brakes at the top of my driveway, my heart stopping at the scene before me. A yellow bulldozer was carving destructive paths through my main vegetable fields, crushing months of work in seconds. The neat rows of spring plantings lay mangled and buried. My greenhouse stood partially collapsed, its frame twisted and plastic covering shredded. Behind the bulldozer's controls sat my father, his face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. My mother and Rebecca watched from the family SUV parked at the field's edge, their expressions a disturbing mixture of satisfaction and detachment. Jackson stood at the property line, filming the destruction on his phone. 2 other neighbors had arrived and were witnessing the chaos, their faces shocked. I leaped from my truck and ran toward the bulldozer, waving my arms and screaming for my father to stop. Either he didn't see me or chose to ignore me as he continued demolishing a section of irrigation piping, sending water spraying across the ruined field. "Dad, stop. What are you doing?" I finally reached the side of the machine, climbing onto the tread to make him see me. He cut the engine, his face flushed with exertion and anger. "This ends today. You've had your chance to be reasonable. Get off my property. You're destroying everything." His laugh was cold and unfamiliar. "Not your property anymore. This land belongs to your sister now. The courts will see that we tried everything to resolve this amicably." I looked toward the SUV where my mother now stood beside Rebecca. "How could you let him do this?" My mother's voice carried across the field. "This could have been avoided if you'd just signed the papers, Stephen. This is on you." Rebecca stepped forward. "We're doing what Grandpa should have done, making sure family resources are shared fairly." The devastation around me was overwhelming. 6 months of work destroyed in less than an hour. The early lettuce and spinach were completely gone. The greenhouse crops crushed. Equipment damaged or ruined. Even if I replanted immediately, I'd lose most of the growing season. When my father restarted the bulldozer's engine, something inside me snapped. I climbed onto the machine and physically tried to stop him, reaching for the keys. He shoved me backwards, and I tumbled onto the churned soil. "Get up and face reality," he shouted, revving the engine louder. "This farm fantasy is over. Matthew's breaking ground next month, whether you like it or not." As if summoned by his name, Matthew's black luxury car appeared on the driveway. He emerged, looking both concerned and calculating, immediately starting to film with his phone. "Stephen, calm down," he called, approaching cautiously. "Your father's understandably upset about your stubbornness. Let's talk about this like businessmen." I pulled out my own phone with shaking hands, calling 911 while simultaneously trying to document the damage. "I need police at 1487 County Line Road. My father is destroying my property with a bulldozer. There's extensive damage. Please hurry." Through tears of rage and heartbreak, I photographed my devastated fields from multiple angles. The newly installed drip irrigation system lay in twisted ruins. The greenhouse structure that had cost me $11,000 to build was half collapsed. The spring crops representing thousands in expected income were buried under churned soil. My father continued his rampage, now targeting my equipment shed. The bulldozer's blade caught the corner of the structure, tearing away siding and exposing the tools and supplies inside. "This land belongs to your sister now," he shouted again, his voice breaking with emotion that seemed more like desperation than anger. "You should have taken the deal." I stood amid the destruction, something cold and resolute forming in my chest. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was criminal destruction. These people weren't acting like family. They were behaving like enemies. Jackson approached, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "The police are 4 minutes out. I've got everything recorded, start to finish. He can't get away with this." When the first sheriff's department vehicles appeared, Lights flashing as they sped up the driveway, my father finally stopped the bulldozer. My mother hurried to his side as he climbed down, her expression shifting from satisfaction to concern. Rebecca and Matthew huddled together, urgently whispering. I could see their strategy forming. Damage control. Explanations. Excuses. As the officers approached, I felt a strange calm replace my panic. I had truth on my side. I had evidence. Most importantly, I had done nothing wrong. It was time for justice. 4 patrol cars arrived within minutes of each other, officers emerging with hands cautiously near their weapons. The scene must have appeared chaotic. A bulldozer in the middle of destroyed fields, family members in obvious conflict, neighbors filming everything. The lead officer, Sergeant Martinez, quickly took control. Everyone stay where you are. I need to speak with property owners first. My father immediately stepped forward. I'm Richard Parker. This land belongs to our family. There's been a misunderstanding. I interrupted, my voice steadier than I expected. I'm Stephen Parker. This is my farm. I have the deed and title in my name. My father has destroyed my crops and property after I refused to sign it over to my sister. Sergeant Martinez ordered officers to separate everyone for individual statements. I was escorted to a patrol car, where I provided my identification and property documents, which I fortunately kept copies of in my truck. The officer listened intently as I explained the situation, from the Sunday brunch ultimatum to the escalating harassment. I have surveillance system footage of the entire incident, I told him, pulling up the security app on my phone. And my neighbor Jackson has been recording since it began. The officer viewed several video clips showing my father's deliberate destruction. His professional demeanor couldn't hide his shock at the extent of damage. These are serious allegations, Mr. Parker. Criminal trespassing, destruction of property, possibly attempted theft of real estate through intimidation. From where I sat, I could see my father gesturing angrily to another officer, my mother crying beside him. Rebecca and Matthew had cornered a third officer, Matthew's hand on the officer's shoulder in a friendly manner, as he spoke earnestly. That's Councilman Wilson's son with your sister, the officer noted. You should know. He has significant influence in the county. Does that mean my father won't face consequences? I asked. It means document everything and get a good lawyer, he replied. But this level of destruction is beyond what even connections can easily dismiss. After examining the property damage with agricultural experts who happened to be among my neighboring farmers, the officers conferred. Sergeant Martinez approached my father with a grim expression. Mr. Parker, based on the evidence and witness statements, I'm placing you under arrest for criminal damage to property, trespassing, and destruction of agricultural assets. My mother's wail cut through the air as my father was handcuffed. This is your fault, Stephen. How could you do this to your own father? Rebecca rushed toward me, her designer shoes inappropriate and sinking in the soft field soil. You could stop this right now. Tell them you won't press charges, and we can work this out privately. Like you worked it out with a bulldozer? I replied quietly. This isn't a negotiation anymore. Matthew intercepted the officer leading my father toward a patrol car. There seems to be confusion here, officer. Richard has partial ownership interest in this property through prior family arrangements. I can have my attorney clarify. Sir. Step back. The officer interrupted. Any property claims can be addressed in court. The destruction is documented and undeniable. The sight of my father in handcuffs should have brought satisfaction, but I felt only hollow grief. This was my family, destroying themselves through greed and entitlement. As the patrol car containing my father drove away, my mother collapsed into Rebecca's arms, both women glaring at me with naked hatred. Matthew approached me with his professional smile firmly in place. "Stephen, this has gotten out of hand, but we can still fix it. Drop the charges, sign the development agreement, and this all goes away. Otherwise, your father goes to jail, and this gets very, very ugly for everyone." "It's already ugly," I said. "And it was your doing, not mine. You have no idea who you're dealing with," he replied, his smile vanishing. "I've got the mayor, half the county commissioners, and the planning board in my corner. One phone call from me, and agricultural inspectors will find violations on this farm that'll shut you down faster than your father's bulldozer." Jackson stepped between us. "That sounded like a threat, Mr. Chambers. Would you like to repeat it from my phone recording?" Matthew retreated, but his parting glance promised this wasn't over. The next weeks passed in a blur of legal meetings and property assessments. The district attorney charged my father with felony criminal damage, trespassing, and attempted conversion of property. My civil attorney filed a lawsuit against my father, mother, sister, and brother-in-law for conspiracy, damages, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Agricultural experts documented losses exceeding $200,000. Beyond the immediate crop destruction, soil remediation would be needed in areas where fuel had leaked from damaged equipment. The greenhouse would require complete rebuilding. Irrigation systems were a total loss. The emotional toll was immeasurable. I alternated between paralyzing grief and intense focus. Neighbors helped clear debris and salvage what crops remained untouched, but the farm's productivity was severely compromised for the season. My therapy sessions doubled as I struggled with the trauma of such personal betrayal. Local media caught wind of the story, initially reporting it as a family farm dispute turns violent. When surveillance footage leaked online, public opinion swung decisively in my favor. My father's shouted claim that this land belongs to your sister now became particularly damning evidence of the conspiracy. Through the discovery process, my attorneys uncovered disturbing communications. Email exchanges between Rebecca, Matthew, and my parents revealed their scheme had been in development for months. Matthew's company was overextended on other projects and desperately needed my land to satisfy investors. My parents had already signed agreements, guaranteeing them 20% of development profits. Most shocking was an email from Matthew to my parents 2 days before the bulldozer incident. "Richard needs to understand that possession is 9/10 of the law. If Stephen won't sign, physical occupation and alteration of the property strengthens our position. The courts favor development. Some destroyed vegetables won't matter once the rezoning is approved." The discovery process also revealed Matthew had made substantial contributions to several officials' campaigns shortly before filing for the fraudulent rezoning. His company had already collected deposits from 26 potential homebuyers for lots that would be situated on my land. My father remained free on bail, prohibited from contacting me or approaching the farm. My mother left increasingly hostile voicemails, blaming me for destroying the family. Rebecca gave interviews portraying herself as the victim of grandfather's unfair will and my obsessive attachment to worthless land. Through it all, I focused on healing myself and my farm. The community response overwhelmed me with gratitude. Local farmers donated seeds and starter plants. A neighboring organic farmer offered greenhouse space for replacement crops. Agricultural students from the state university created a service project to help restore the damaged fields. Matthew's threats proved hollow when his political connections distanced themselves after the evidence became public. The fraudulent rezoning application was withdrawn. His development company faced investor lawsuits for taking deposits on unavailable property. As the court date approached, my father's attorney proposed a settlement, dropped criminal charges in exchange for a simple property split giving Rebecca 5 acres. I declined. This had gone beyond property rights to a fundamental breach of trust and deliberate destruction of my livelihood. Accountability was necessary for healing to begin. I would have my day in court. The county courthouse stands as an imposing limestone structure in the center of town, its granite steps worn by generations, seeking justice. On the first day of my father's criminal trial, I climbed those steps feeling the weight of family legacy and betrayal on my shoulders. Inside, the courtroom's polished wooden benches divided like the Red Sea. My supporters on one side, family members, and their allies on the other. My mother refused to meet my eyes as she sat rigidly beside Rebecca. Matthew sat behind them in an expensive suit, reviewing documents with their attorney. My father, in a subdued navy blue suit that hung loosely on his frame, looked older than his 63 years. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating in its simplicity. This case is about destruction, not of mere property, but of trust. The district attorney began. Richard Parker didn't just damage crops and equipment. He attempted to bulldoze his son's legal rights and livelihood because greed overcame family loyalty. The defense painted a different picture. A father desperately trying to secure family financial stability, pushed to emotional breaking point by his son's irrational refusal to help his struggling parents and share with his sister. They characterized the destruction as an emotional outburst rather than a calculated attempt to force me off my land. The surveillance footage played on large screens made their arguments crumble. The systematic nature of the destruction was obvious. My father had targeted the most valuable crops and equipment first. The audio captured his declarations about the land belonging to Rebecca now. The premeditation was undeniable. Jackson's testimony proved crucial. As a respected third-generation farmer himself, his description of the agricultural and financial impact carried weight with the jury. What I witnessed wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, he testified. It was a calculated attack on a farmer's livelihood at the most vulnerable time of the growing season. Agricultural experts explained that beyond the immediate crop loss, portions of the soil would require extensive remediation due to compaction and contamination from the bulldozer. The financial impact extended well beyond one season. When I took the stand, the prosecutor guided me through the history. Grandfather's specific bequest, my years building the farm, the Sunday brunch ambush, the escalating pressure, and finally the destruction. I maintained composure until asked about the moment I first saw my fields destroyed. Everything I had worked for was being erased, I said, my voice breaking slightly. Not by natural disaster or crop disease, risks every farmer accepts, but by my own father. He wasn't just destroying plants. He was trying to destroy my future and my grandfather's legacy. During cross-examination, the defense attorney tried to portray me as unreasonable and vindictive. Isn't it true? You refused to even discuss sharing some acreage with your sister? That you preferred to see your father prosecuted rather than reach a family compromise? I did discuss it, I replied calmly. I explained that the land was legally mine, that I'd built a functioning farm there, and that I had no intention of selling to developers. What I refused to do was surrender to threats and ultimatums. The real turning point came unexpectedly during my father's testimony. Initially, he maintained the narrative of emotional distress and temporary insanity, but under persistent questioning, cracks appeared in his story. Why target the greenhouse first? The prosecutor asked. Why destroy irrigation systems rather than just crops if this was an emotional outburst? My father's composure faltered. I needed to make him understand the consequences of his stubbornness. Consequences? So this was punishment, not emotion? You don't understand the pressure we were under. My father suddenly shouted, his face reddening. Matthew threatened to sue us for the money he'd already spent on development plans. He said we'd lose our house, that he'd ruin us financially if we couldn't deliver the land we promised. A shocked murmur ran through the courtroom. The defense attorney attempted to call for a recess, but the judge denied it. "You promised land that wasn't yours to give?" the prosecutor pressed. "We thought Stephen would be reasonable." Matthew assured us once the development plans were underway, no court would side with a small farmer over major economic development. He said his connections would ensure rezoning regardless of Stephen's objections. This unplanned confession shifted the entire dynamic of the trial. My father's testimony inadvertently confirmed the conspiracy and implicated Matthew directly in planning the destruction. When my mother took the stand, she attempted damage control but ended up revealing more. Under questioning, she admitted Matthew had coached them on what would constitute salvageable legal circumstances after the destruction. He said, "If we could physically occupy the property and demonstrate that Stephen had abandoned his agricultural use, adverse possession principles could be applied," she testified. The bulldozer was his suggestion, though he said he couldn't be present when it happened for liability reasons. Rebecca's testimony proved equally damaging. Attempting to distance herself from the destruction, she revealed late-night strategy meetings where Matthew had outlined exactly how the land would be transferred once I was removed from the equation. Matthew said the property's value for development was 50 times its agricultural value, she testified. He said Stephen was being selfish, denying the family this opportunity. "And did you believe your brother had no right to property legally left to him by your grandfather?" the prosecutor asked. "Grandpa was manipulated," she insisted. "Stephen spent all that time with him at the end, turning him against us. That land should have been shared. Do you have any evidence of this manipulation?" "I don't need evidence. It's obvious. Who leaves valuable property to be used for vegetables when it could make everyone rich?" Her entitled attitude did not play well with the jury, particularly the 3 members with farming backgrounds. By the trial's end, the family's conspiracy had been thoroughly exposed. Matthew's company faced separate investigations for attempted real estate fraud and improper influence of public officials. My mother and Rebecca faced potential charges as co-conspirators. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. My father's sentencing included 2 years of probation, 6 months of weekend incarceration, 400 hours of community service at local farms, and full restitution for damages. As the judge delivered the sentence, she addressed my father directly. "Mr. Parker, your actions represent one of the most disturbing betrayals of family trust this court has witnessed. You destroyed not only valuable agricultural resources, but also attempted to nullify your son's legal property rights through violence and intimidation. This sentence reflects both the material damage and the profound breach of the parent-child relationship." When the court adjourned, I felt no triumph, only profound sadness and exhaustion. As I walked down those courthouse steps, a reporter asked how it felt to win. "There are no winners here," I replied. "Only painful lessons about greed and consequences." The civil case settled shortly after the criminal verdict, with my parents, Rebecca, and Matthew liable for damages exceeding $500,000. Matthew's development company filed for bankruptcy protection, and his political aspirations evaporated amid the scandal. Justice had been served, but the price was the complete fracture of my family. Now came the harder task: rebuilding my life and my farm from the ruins. The morning after the trial concluded, I stood in the center of my damaged farm as dawn broke over the scarred fields. For the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of litigation pressing on my chest. Legal victory brought closure, but not healing. That journey was just beginning. Physical rebuilding started immediately. Insurance covered some losses, and the legal settlement provided funds for restoration. But the process would take time. The community response humbled me deeply. Neighboring farmers organized volunteer workdays to clear debris and prepare soil for replanting. Local businesses donated materials for greenhouse reconstruction. The agricultural college sent students who created a comprehensive restoration plan as their capstone project. "This isn't charity," Jackson told me as 20 volunteers arrived one Saturday. "This is community. We stand together because next time it might be one of us needing help." The damaged soil became a metaphor for my emotional state, in need of careful attention, time to recover, and patience during the healing process. Agricultural experts helped implement regenerative techniques to restore soil health. Sections most severely impacted were converted to cover crops for the season to rebuild nutrient content naturally. New irrigation systems improved upon the destroyed originals. The rebuilt greenhouse incorporated sustainable design elements I'd previously couldn't afford. As structures rose from the wreckage, so did my spirits, gradually and unevenly. My therapist helped me navigate the complex grief of family betrayal. "You've lost your family as you knew them," she explained. "That requires mourning before rebuilding can truly begin." The most difficult aspect was accepting that reconciliation, if it ever came, would never restore what was lost. Trust, once shattered so completely, could at best be replaced by something new and different. Never the same innocent faith I once had in my parents' love. 3 months after the trial, my father contacted me through his therapist, requesting a meeting. We sat at a neutral location, a park halfway between our homes, with the therapist present as mediator. My father looked diminished, the arrogance replaced by something resembling humility. "I won't ask forgiveness," he began. "What I did is unforgivable, but I need you to know I regret it with every fiber of my being." He explained, without excusing, how financial insecurity had made him vulnerable to Matthew's influence, how fear of impoverished retirement had overwhelmed his moral compass, how Matthew had painted me as the obstacle to family security, gradually convincing them all that removing me from the land was not just acceptable but necessary. "I chose greed over my son," he said, voice breaking. "No amount of community service or restitution can fix that, but I'm trying to become someone who deserves to know his son again, even if that takes the rest of my life." I couldn't offer forgiveness that day, but I did offer honesty. "I don't know what our relationship can be now, but I'm willing to find out, slowly, with boundaries." Similar conversations eventually occurred with my mother, whose remorse seemed more centered on consequences than actions. Rebecca remained distant longer, her pride preventing acknowledgement of wrongdoing until her divorce from Matthew 6 months later. The divorce surprised no one who had witnessed Matthew's character during the trial. His company's bankruptcy revealed financial mismanagement, extending far beyond the failed attempt to seize my land. Rebecca, humbled by the experience and separated from his toxic influence, began her own journey of reflection. "I was so fixated on what I thought I deserved that I couldn't see what I was destroying," she admitted during our first post-trial conversation. "Watching Matthew's true character emerge showed me how I'd become someone I don't recognize or like." Reconciliation progressed slowly, with professional guidance and clear boundaries. Family therapy sessions revealed dysfunctional patterns extending back generations. Entitlement, poor communication, conditional love based on compliance. Breaking these patterns required sustained effort from everyone involved. One positive outcome was the creation of a formal family trust protecting the farm for future generations. Working with agricultural conservation experts, I established legally binding conditions ensuring the land would remain in agricultural use regardless of ownership changes. This protection brought peace of mind that grandfather's legacy wouldn't face similar threats in the future. As the farm returned to productivity, I implemented changes reflecting lessons learned. I established educational programs for at-risk youth, teaching farming skills and environmental stewardship. The property that my family had seen only in terms of monetary value became a community resource producing not just food but knowledge and healing. The most profound healing came through forgiveness, not the cheap, immediate kind that denies harm done, but the hard-earned variety that acknowledges painful truth while choosing to move forward unburdened by resentment. This forgiveness was a gift to myself more than to those who had wronged me. A year after the destruction, the farm hosted its first harvest festival. Hundreds of community members who had supported the rebuilding came to celebrate. Standing amid flourishing fields that had once been bulldozed ruins, I felt grandfather's presence strongly. "This land has heart," he'd told me years ago. The truth of those words had never been more evident. The soil had healed, the crops had returned, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed to preserving this legacy. My parents attended the festival briefly, our interaction civil but tentative. Rebecca came separately, spending time learning about the educational programs with genuine interest. These small steps toward healing didn't erase the past, but suggested a possible future where family bonds, though transformed, might endure. The most important lesson from this painful journey wasn't about land rights or legal justice, though those mattered. It was about the courage to stand firm for what's right, despite overwhelming pressure to surrender. It was about recognizing that true family supports your dreams rather than sacrificing them for profit. Most importantly, it was about understanding that forgiveness doesn't require sacrificing boundaries or principles. It means freeing yourself from the burden of hatred while still protecting what matters. Today, the farm flourishes beyond what I imagined possible before the crisis. The scars remain visible in certain light. A slight depression where the bulldozer cut deepest, the newer greenhouse standing where the original once stood. But like all scars, they tell a story of wounding and survival, destruction and renewal. Have you ever had to stand firm against pressure from those who should have supported you? Or found yourself rebuilding after betrayal by those you trusted most? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others find strength in their own battles. Don't forget to like this video if you found value in my story. Subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience, and share with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground when it matters most. Thank you for witnessing my story. And remember, protecting your boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-respect that teaches others how to truly respect you too.